Welcome to Conspiracy Deconstructed. We're the show that dives deep into those huge, complicated stories. You know, the ones with government reports, conflicting news articles, insider accounts, and we try to piece together what really happened. Today, we're tackling a big one, maybe one of the most explosive theories of the last few decades. It connects U.S. foreign policy directly to a devastating crisis right here at home. I'm talking about the Gary Webb Dark Alliance story. The idea that the CIA helped fuel the crack epidemic in America.
Yeah, the core theory here, if you strip it down, is just massive.
Yeah.
It basically says that back in the 1980s, the CIA or people working with them either set up or, deliberately allowed tons of cocaine to flow into American inner cities.
And specifically into South Central Los Angeles.
Exactly. South Central LA being ground zero.
And the why behind it. Pure Cold War strategy, allegedly. The idea was they needed money, millions, off the books, untraceable.
To fund the Contra rebels fighting the Sandinista government down in Nicaragua. The government the U.S. saw as a communist threat.
So, fund a secret war abroad by allowing drugs to flood communities at home. And the alleged result. This cocaine pipeline supposedly provided the cheap, potent base that ignited the crack cocaine epidemic across the U.S.
It's a devastating accusation. So our mission today is to really dig into the sources. We've got congressional reports, Justice Department findings, the CIA's own internal investigation.
And of course, the original journalism that started it all, Gary Webb's Dark Alliance series from 1996.
Right. We're going to focus on what Webb actually claimed, what evidence proponents used to back it up, and crucially, what the official investigations ultimately concluded.
We want to get past the headlines, separate fact from speculation, and understand the difference between, say, confirmed institutional problems and an actual directed conspiracy. It's complex.
It really is. Okay, let's get into it.
So where does the story even begin? You mentioned 1996 for Webb's series, but the roots go back further, right?
Yeah.
To the 80s.
Absolutely. You can't understand the Dark Alliance controversy without understanding the geopolitics of the mid-1980s. Central America was a major Cold War battleground.
For the Reagan White House, stopping communism in, America's backyard was priority number one. And Nicaragua, with its leftist Sandinista government,
was seen as the big domino that couldn't be allowed to fall fully into the Soviet-Cuban orbit.
And the chosen tool to push back, the Contras. The Nicaraguan resistance fighters, backed by the U.S.
But there's a huge snag, Congress.
Ah, yes, the Boland Amendments.
Exactly. Starting around 82, Congress passed these laws, the Boland Amendments, that basically tied the administration's hands. They restricted and then eventually cut off official U.S. government funding for the Contras.
They didn't want another Vietnam situation, direct U.S. military involvement.
Right. But this created an immediate crisis for the Contra project. Yeah. No official money meant they needed cash from somewhere else. Unofficial cash, off the books.
A 1986 report even said the lack of U.S. aid left the Contras particularly hard-pressed for financial support. It created a funding vacuum.
And that's where things get murky. When covert ops need secret money, illicit activities often fill the gap. A former CIA analyst, David McMichael, talked about this. Once you set up networks for secret arms shipments, it's really hard to control who's involved.
People already involved in crime, like drug running,
are often the ones with the existing networks, the planes, the pilots, the infrastructure. And drugs were incredibly profitable. So this desperation for funds kind of paved the way, maybe unintentionally at first, for drug money to potentially flow into the Contra coffers.
And that simmering backstory just exploded into public view in August 1996. Gary Webb. The San Jose Mercury News, the Dark Alliance series.
Yeah, 3 parts. And it wasn't subtle. Webb drew a direct line. He claimed a specific drug ring based in the Bay Area.
Sold literally tons of cocaine to the big LA street gangs, the Crips and the Bloods.
And this was the crucial link, that this ring funneled millions of dollars in drug profits straight to the Contras, who he described as a CIA-run army.
He didn't just say the Contras dealt drugs. He explicitly linked it to the CIA and the LA crack epidemic.
That was the bombshell.
Yeah.
The series claimed this one Nicaraguan drug ring essentially opened the first pipeline between the Colombian cartels and black neighborhoods in LA.
And in doing so, helped spark a crack explosion. It wasn't just foreign policy blowback. It was presented as almost a targeted fueling of a domestic crisis.
And Webb named names. He put faces to the operation. In LA, the key figure was Freeway, Rick Ross.
A name that became infamous, described as this major crack kingpin in South Central.
Right. Ross himself later talked about being, the first crack millionaire. Webb's series detailed how Ross's suppliers provided him with cocaine that was unusually cheap and incredibly pure.
Which allowed him to massively undercut competitors and really dominate the market just as crack cocaine was taking off.
Exactly. And who were these suppliers, according to Webb? 2 Nicaraguans, Oscar Danilo Blandon and Norwin Meneses.
These were the guys allegedly running the smuggling, getting the coke into the U.S., and supplying dealers like Ross.
And Blandon, in particular, became a really critical figure because later investigations confirmed he did have connections, or at least interactions, with U.S. government entities involved in the Contra effort. He wasn't just some random dealer. He was operating in spaces connected to the Iran-Contra affair.
So you've got the alleged supplier connected to the Contras, the LA dealer distributing the product, and the claim that this pipeline fueled the crack epidemic. You can see why this hit so hard.
Oh, the reaction was immediate. Outrage. Especially as you'd expect in South Central LA, which was devastated by crack. People felt betrayed, targeted.
And politicians noticed. Big names in California senators, Boxer and Feinstein, Congresswoman Maxine Waters, they were demanding answers, loudly.
The pressure was intense. Within weeks, by the end of September 96, the government launched 3 separate major federal investigations to look into Webb's claims.
One by the Department of Justice's Inspector General.
One by the CIA's own Inspector General.
And one by the House Intelligence Committee. The government was forced to investigate itself, essentially.
Which sets the stage for the next part. What evidence did Webb and those who believe the core theory actually point to?
Right. Let's get into the believer's case. What are the specific data points, the documented links that proponents use to argue that, at minimum, the government knew about and maybe even protected Contra-connected drug traffickers?
Okay, probably the first big piece, and it came out before Webb's series, was the Kerry Committee report from 1989. This was a major Senate Foreign Relations Subcommittee investigation led by Senator John Kerry.
Yeah, I remember that. It looked into the whole Iran-Contra mess and related issues.
Exactly, and its findings were pretty stark. The report stated, flat out, that individuals who provided support for the Contras were involved in drug trafficking. Full stop.
So Congress itself confirmed Contra drug links way back in '89.
Confirmed it. And it wasn't just rogue actors. The report detailed how parts of the U.S. government seemed complicit, or at least negligent. Get this. The State Department paid over $806,000 to 4 companies that the committee identified as being owned and operated by narcotics traffickers.
Wait, the State Department paid known drug traffickers for what?
To fly humanitarian aid and supplies down to the Contras, using government money to hire companies run by drug smugglers.
That's astounding.
And it gets worse. In some cases, the report found these payments were made after the traffickers involved had already been indicted on federal drug charges.
So the government knew they were indicted drug traffickers and still paid them taxpayer money to support the Contras.
That's what the Kerry Committee found. Proponents see this as undeniable proof of high-level knowledge and, frankly, complicity. Turning a blind eye doesn't even cover it. It's active funding.
Okay, that's point 1. The Kerry report. What else?
Point 2 centers on specific insider knowledge, mainly revealed through documents that came out during the Iran-Contra investigations, particularly the handwritten notebooks of Oliver North.
Colonel Oliver North, the guy at the National Security Council who was running the secret Contra support network when Congress cut off funding.
The very same. His notebooks became legendary, and they contained entries showing that officials at the highest levels were being told about drug connections within the Contra supply chain.
Like what specifically?
Well, there's an entry from August 1985. North is summarizing a meeting, and he notes that a specific DC-6 airplane, based in Honduras and used for Contra supply flights out of New Orleans.
Okay.
He writes, it's probably being used for drug runs into U.S.
Wow. He wrote that down in his official notebook.
He did. Now, North later claimed he told the DEA about this, but investigators couldn't find any record confirming he actually did. So the implication proponents draw is the NSC knew a Contra supply plane was likely running drugs into the U.S., and maybe nothing was done.
Okay. Any other examples from North?
Yeah, another one, even more direct about the money. July 1985. North is talking with Richard Secord, another key figure in the covert ops. They're discussing an arms cache for the Contras stored in Honduras.
Right.
And North writes in his notes that Secord told him 14M to finance the arms came from drugs.
$14 million.
$14 million.
Yeah.
Directly linked to drug money, acknowledged in a conversation between 2 central players running the secret Contra war, documented by North himself. For believers, this shows awareness at the top that drug money was fueling the operation on a massive scale.
Okay, so Kerry report confirming Contra drug links and State Department payments, North's notebooks showing high-level awareness. What's the third major point?
The third point ties back more directly to Webb-specific figures, Blandon and Meneses. It's the allegation that law enforcement couldn't or wouldn't successfully prosecute these guys because they had protection due to their Contra and alleged CIA ties.
The idea that they were protected assets?
Exactly. And this isn't just speculation. There's a specific documented instance involving something called operational equity.
Operational equity? What's that?
It came out in the CIA's own Inspector General report, the one launched after Webb series. The report confirmed an incident from 1986 related to the so-called Frogman raid, where the DEA seized cash from a member of Meneses' drug ring.
Okay, DEA seizes drug money. Standard procedure.
Right. But the CIA IG report confirms the CIA then formally requested that the Justice Department return $36,800 of that seized drug money.
The CIA asked for drug money back. Why?
The CIA stated reason, according to their own IG report, was to protect an operational equity, i.e. a Contra support group in which its CIA had an operational interest.
Whoa, let me unpack that. The CIA wanted drug money returned to drug traffickers because protecting the traffickers' Contra support group was more important than the drug bust itself.
That's precisely how proponents interpret it. They see it as the smoking gun. The CIA prioritizing its Contra mission, its operational equity, over enforcing U.S. drug laws on U.S. soil, even intervening to get seized drug money back into the network.
That does sound incredibly damning.
It's a powerful piece of evidence supporting the idea of institutional protection.
Okay. Is there a fourth point?
Yeah, the fourth point involves allegations of direct interference in investigations coming from law enforcement agents themselves.
People on the ground.
Right. There's a former DEA agent, Celerino Castillo. He claimed that when he tried to investigate drug smuggling connected to the Contras operating out of Ilopango Airport in El Salvador, a known hub for Contra logistics, his efforts were blocked. Thwarted by his own DEA bosses, by the U.S. Embassy there, and specifically by the CIA.
He's alleging direct obstruction by the agency?
He is. And then there's another DEA agent, Hector Bareles, who worked on related cases. He gave some very public testimony.
What did he say?
Bareles stated, quote, "I know specifically that some of the CIA contract workers, meaning some of the pilots, in fact were bringing drugs into the country and landing some of these drugs in government air bases."
CIA contract pilots landing drugs on U.S. government bases.
That's what he alleged. He believed elements working for the CIA were involved in bringing drugs into the country. So you have firsthand accounts from DEA agents essentially saying, yes, people connected to the CIA were flying drugs in, sometimes using government facilities, and investigations were being hampered.
Okay, so summing up the Believer's case. Confirmed Contra drug ties and funding from the Kerry report. High-level awareness shown in North's notebooks, the CIA intervening to protect operational equity linked to drug money, and DEA agents alleging obstruction and direct involvement by CIA contractors.
That's a fair summary of the strongest points proponents raise. It paints a picture of, at minimum, deep complicity and tolerance, if not outright direction.
Which leads us to the crucial part, the deconstruction. What did those three big federal investigations actually find when they looked into Webb's specific claims?
Right. This is where the narrative shifts dramatically. Despite all that evidence of tolerance and awareness we just discussed, when it came to Webb's core thesis that the CIA intentionally orchestrated this specific drug ring, Blandon Meneses Ross, to flood LA with crack to fund the Contras, all three investigations came back with a resounding no.
All three. The DOJ, the CIA, IG, and the House Committee.
All three. They concluded that the central claim of a deliberate high-level CIA conspiracy to start the crack epidemic via this pipeline was unsupported by the evidence they gathered.
Okay, let's break that down. Fact check number one.
Fact check one. No direct CIA link to Webb's specific figures. This was a key finding, especially from the CIA's own Inspector General report, the HITS report. It stated unequivocally, no evidence was found that any CIA employee, past or present, had any direct or indirect dealing with Freeway Rick Ross, Danilo Blandon, or Norwin Meneses.
So the agency says they never dealt with those three guys at all?
Correct. The report also found no evidence that Ross, Blandon, or Meneses were ever employed by the CIA, formally or informally. And, crucially, the IG found no evidence the CIA interfered with any law enforcement actions, specifically against those three individuals.
That directly contradicts Webb's implication that they were protected assets, at least in terms of direct CIA intervention against their specific cases.
It does. The IG report drew a very clear line there.
Okay. Fact check number 2.
Fact check 2. Crack epidemic exaggeration and the financial scale. This came largely from the Department of Justice IG report. It directly addressed Webb's claim that Blandon and Menezes opened the first pipeline and were responsible for spreading the crack epidemic. The DOJ IG found those claims were unsupported. Yes, Blandon and Menezes were major cocaine dealers. Yes, they contributed some money to the Contras, but the report concluded their contributions were not sufficient to finance the organization and were significantly less than the millions Webb series alleged.
Do we know how much they actually contributed?
Based on court records and the investigations, the figures generally cited are somewhere in the range of $50,000, maybe up to $100,000 total, passed from Blandon Menezes to the Contras.
Okay, 50 Contra K is definitely not the millions needed to fund a guerrilla army. Still wrong, obviously, drug money is drug money, but the scale is vastly different.
Vastly different. And on the crack epidemic point, the DOJ report and even Webb's own newspaper later acknowledged that blaming this one ring for starting or spreading the entire epidemic was a huge oversimplification.
Right, crack was taking off in multiple cities for complex reasons, economics, policing, the chemistry of crack itself.
Exactly. Jerry Ceppos, who was the executive editor of the San Jose Mercury News when Dark Alliance ran, eventually wrote a public letter admitting the series oversimplified the epidemic's origins. He called it a broad-based phenomenon with many players. Blandon and Menezes were significant dealers in LA, but they didn't single-handedly create the national crisis.
Okay, so no direct CIA link to the key figures, and the scale of both their funding and their impact on the epidemic was exaggerated. What's fact check number 3? This feels like the core issue.
Fact check 3. Institutional knowledge versus intentional plot. This is where it gets really nuanced and honestly pretty damning for the CIA in a different way. While the CIA IG report cleared the agency of the conspiracy alleged by Webb, Inspector General Frederick Hitz was absolutely scathing about how the agency handled the known allegations of drug trafficking swirling around the Contra program.
So, not a plot, but definite negligence. Or worse.
Hitz himself testified that the CIA did not, in an expeditious or consistent fashion, cut off relationships with individuals supporting the Contra program who were alleged to have engaged in drug trafficking activity.
Meaning they knew people helping the Contras were dealing drugs and they kept working with them anyway.
That's precisely what Hitz confirmed. The agency tolerated it. They didn't sever ties when drug allegations surfaced against their Contra assets or supporters.
Why? If it wasn't a plot, why tolerate it?
Hitz basically blamed systemic failures. He called it ineptitude and pointed to bureaucratically challenged systems. He highlighted a massive failure in policy, a 1982 agreement, a Memorandum of Understanding, MOU, between the CIA director and the Attorney General.
Okay.
That MOU laid out what crimes CIA agents were required to report to the Justice Department if they came across them. Critically, that 1982 MOU omitted narcotics violations from the mandatory reporting list for CIA assets and non-employees.
Wait, so for years, CIA agents weren't formally required to report drug trafficking they encountered among their foreign assets or contacts?
For about a decade relating to non-employees or assets, yes. That omission created a huge loophole, a gray area where drug activity connected to CIA operations could essentially be ignored or not formally reported up the chain to law enforcement.
That seems less like ineptitude and more like plausible deniability built into the system.
You could certainly interpret it that way. Hitz also found other issues, like a 1987 internal memo meant to tighten up vetting of Contra-related contractors never actually got distributed properly to agents in the field, just basic bureaucratic failure compounding the problem.
So the IG's conclusion was essentially no conspiracy, but a massive, decade-long institutional failure to address known drug ties, facilitated by flawed policies and poor management.
Pretty much. Hitz stated the agency effectively had covered up Contra drug trafficking for more than a decade, not by actively plotting it, but by failing to investigate, failing to report consistently, and failing to cut ties with compromised individuals because the Contra mission was paramount.
Okay, one more fact check. What about Oliver North and that high-level awareness, the $14 million, the drug claims?
Fact check 4, Oliver North and high-level awareness. The investigations confirmed North's diary entries were real. The high-level awareness of general drug trafficking connected to the Contras was there. The Kerry Committee had already established that. But the House Intelligence Committee, which looked closely at this, found no evidence that this general awareness translated into knowledge within the CIA about Blandon and Menezes' specific drug operation in California, or their support for the local Contra group there.
So the White House NSC knew drug money was generally involved, but the CIA wasn't specifically aware of the LA pipeline Webb described.
That was the conclusion. The controversy confirmed by the investigations wasn't that the CIA ran the LA crack trade. They refuted that. The confirmed controversy was that the Contras and their associates were involved in drug trafficking, as the Kerry report showed. And the CIA knew about Contra drug links in general and systematically failed to address them, effectively tolerating it because of the overriding goal of winning the war in Nicaragua.
So tolerance, negligence, systemic failure, but not a directed plot to poison American cities. That's the official finding.
That's the bottom line from all three major investigations.
But that still leaves a huge question. Why did this story resonate so powerfully? If the core conspiracy was refuted, why does Dark Alliance still echo today?
That's the human element, right? Even with the conspiracy refuted, the confirmed parts of the story, the government tolerance, the prioritizing of foreign wars over domestic problems, the Kerry findings, the operational equity memo tapped into something very real.
A deep sense of betrayal.
Absolutely, particularly in the African-American community. Here you have communities absolutely ravaged by crack cocaine, already dealing with systemic issues like poverty, policing, the beginnings of mass incarceration.
And along comes a story that says, this wasn't random. This wasn't just crime. This was enabled, even indirectly, by your own government pursuing its foreign policy goals.
It provided a narrative, a clear explanation for unimaginable suffering. It connected the dots between covert action abroad and devastation at home. You also have to remember the history, things like COINTELPRO, the Tuskegee experiment there, was already a deep-seated and often justified distrust of government institutions within the Black community.
So Dark Alliance landed on fertile ground.
Incredibly fertile ground. And we know the CIA saw this coming. A declassified internal CIA memo from the time actually called the story a nightmare scenario.
A nightmare.
Yeah, they lumped it in with fantastic allegations like UFOs and JFK conspiracies, but crucially, they noted it played directly on public distrust in government. They knew why it was potentially so damaging.
And that led to a massive pushback, right? Especially from other media outlets.
Oh, yeah. The media fallout was intense and mostly directed at Gary Webb personally. The big papers, the Washington Post, the New York Times, and especially Webb's California rival, the Los Angeles Times, launched huge investigations of their own.
Not just reporting on the story, but investigating Webb's investigation.
Exactly. The LA Times famously assigned something like 17 reporters to pick apart Dark Alliance. And they did find flaws. They poked holes in the oversimplified link to the start of the crack epidemic, the exact amount of money, the directness of the CIA connection as Webb portrayed it.
They focused on the parts the official investigations later refuted.
They did. But the sheer weight of the institutional response felt, to many, like piling on. Like the media establishment circling the wagons to protect powerful institutions.
Some journalists later regretted that, didn't they?
Some did. One former LA Times reporter involved in their coverage later called it overkill and admitted it was a tawdry exercise that effectively ruined that reporter's career, meaning Webb's career.
And how did Webb see it?
Webb saw it as deliberate. He felt the government couldn't directly discredit him, so they used the giant corporate press, as he called it, to do the job for them, to muddy the waters, focus on the exaggerations, and bury the uncomfortable truths about government tolerance that even the official reports would later concede. He had this quote about how he'd had an easy career before because he hadn't written anything important enough to suppress.
Wow, that's chilling.
It speaks to the pressure he was under. He eventually resigned from the Mercury News. He couldn't get another major reporting job. He was professionally exiled.
Which leads, tragically, to the end of his story.
Yeah, the tragic end. In December 2004, 8 years after Dark Alliance broke, Gary Webb was found dead in his home. The cause of death was suicide.
But the circumstances were unusual, weren't they?
Highly unusual, and the source of continued speculation. He died from 2 gunshot wounds to the head, fired from a .38 caliber revolver he owned.
2 shots. How was that ruled a suicide?
The Sacramento County coroner investigated thoroughly and concluded it was suicide. Their finding was that the first shot was non-fatal, likely passing through his cheek, and that he then managed to fire a second fatal shot into his head. While technically possible, it's obviously extremely rare.
And that detail alone has kept conspiracy theories alive ever since. The idea that it wasn't suicide, but retribution for exposing government secrets.
Exactly. Even though the official ruling was suicide, the two-shot detail ensures that for many people, Webb's death remains linked darkly to the Dark Alliance story and the powerful forces it challenged. It underscores the deep distrust the whole saga generated.
Okay, so let's try to synthesize this. We've gone through the theory, the evidence proponents cite, the official fact checks, and the human impact. What's the takeaway?
The takeaway seems to be this. No, the evidence doesn't support the claim that the CIA intentionally created the crack epidemic in L.A. via the Blandon-Menezes-Ross pipeline. All three government investigations refute that specific conspiracy.
But
Those same government investigations carry DOJ IG, CIA IG, provide overwhelming evidence that elements of the U.S. government, particularly the CIA, were aware of widespread drug trafficking connected to their Contra allies.
they knew about it.
They knew, and they tolerated it. They failed to cut ties, failed to report consistently, failed to enforce accountability, and in at least one documented case, intervened to protect drug-linked operational equity. They called it ineptitude, bureaucratic failure, turning a blind eye.
But the effect of turning that blind eye was enabling drug traffickers connected to a U.S.-backed covert operation.
Precisely. It created a permissive environment where groups involved with the Contras could traffic drugs with less fear of consequence, because their connection to the anti-communist cause offered a degree of protection, or at least institutional indifference, from parts of the U.S. government.
So it's a story about priorities. Geopolitical goals trumping domestic law enforcement and community well-being.
That seems to be the unavoidable conclusion from the government's own findings. The obsession with stopping the Sandinistas led to decisions and systemic failures that allowed drug networks connected to that fight to flourish, with devastating consequences back home.
Which brings us back to that final, really provocative thought. The question isn't if Contra-connected groups dealt drugs. That's confirmed history. The question Dark Alliance forces us to confront is about institutional responsibility.
Right. When national security agencies fail so badly through negligence, flawed policy, willful blindness, whatever you call it, and those failures directly contribute to a massive social disaster like the crack epidemic.
Is that functional difference between that kind of catastrophic failure and deliberate, intentional harm really meaningful to the communities that were destroyed? Does the intent matter when the outcome is the same level of devastation?
It's a deeply uncomfortable question about accountability and the real-world costs of covert action and institutional indifference.
So for you listening, thinking back on everything we've discussed, the Kerry report's findings on State Department payments, North's $14 million drug money note, the CIA asking for seized drug cash back to protect operational equity, what piece of the confirmed evidence strikes you as the most powerful indicator of where the system failed most profoundly in this whole saga?
Let us know what you think.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive on Conspiracy Deconstructed. We'll be back next time exploring another story that makes you question the official version of events.